Hello there, and welcome to another episode
Yes.
of the Sudds-R-Us podcast. Today's Black History Month topic is going to be pretty powerful, y'all.
Oh yeah.
We
Oh
have been on information overload,
yeah.
getting all of
That's
this
right.
impactful information for you
Hmm.
about two legendary giants
Right.
that have influenced the world
Hmm.
with their jazz music. Before we get started, though, we'd like for you to take a moment to like, comment, and share this particular podcast. And if you have not clicked that button to reveal who you are,
Hmm.
please do that in our post. If you're on Facebook, please do that. We would greatly appreciate it. But just to give you a little bit of history about jazz, I was really blown away to hear that there are so many variations of jazz. There's early jazz that the pianists Scott Joplin and Jelly
Hmm.
Rose Morton and
Hmm.
James P. Johnson. And
Hmm.
then you talk about the cornetist. That
Right.
was Buddy Bolden and King Oliver. Sidney Bechet was a
Right.
saxophonist. And of course, Louis Armstrong was a trumpeter. Then there's that big band and swing music with
Hmm.
the
Hmm.
well-known Duke Ellington.
Right.
That's
Right.
all that needs to be in that category. And then you have bebop. There was Charlie Parker, Dizzy Gillespie,
Hmm. Hmm.
Theoli, Thelonious
Thelonious Monk.
Smear, yeah, Monk.
Right.
And then Miles Davis. That was
Hmm.
some really, freaky stuff. I don't know what was going through their head. That I couldn't get into that jazz.
Right.
But then there
Right.
was gypsy jazz,
Hmm.
hard bop, cool jazz,
Wow.
model jazz with the
Hmm.
likes of Chick Corea and
Yeah.
Herbie Hancock,
Right.
McCoy
Right.
Tyner. That's up kind of up our alley
There you
there.
go. There you
And then
go.
there was Latin jazz, free
Hmm.
jazz, fusion. I don't
Hmm.
know if you've heard of fusion, but there was Weather Report
Right. Right.
and Craft Wreck.
Craft Rat.
If you
Yeah.
ever heard of them, Stanley Turntine was in
Right.
that category.
Right.
And
Right.
then our all-time favorite is the smooth
Smooth
jazz, or
jazz. There you
what they
go.
used to call it in the Bay Area, the quiet storm,
Yeah. There you
with
go.
Dave Koz and
Hmm.
Chris Bodie and Al
Hmm.
Jarreau, Kenny
Hmm.
G,
Yeah.
Boney
Bonnie James.
James,
Yeah.
Rick Braun,
Oh
all
yeah.
of those
Yeah.
guys.
Yeah.
Not to mention, now we got to put these guys in a little separate category because
Hmm.
they were phenomenal. George Duke,
Yours do. Yeah.
Grover Washington,
Oh
God
yeah.
rest his soul,
Oh yeah.
and Stanley
Henry
Clark,
Clark.
who
There
is
you go.
still alive and
Hmm.
thumping, thumping. So, like I said, we're going to bring to life
Right.
and light because some people may not even know about these two
Hmm.
giants,
Hmm.
two of the legendary giants in the jazz arena, cornetist
Right.
and father of jazz,
Hmm.
Charles Joseph Buddy Bolden. If you have
Right.
not
Right.
looked at the
Right.
documentary, we
Hmm.
highly recommend that you do that.
Hmm.
And then the trumpeter,
Right. Right.
Louis
Oh,
Daniel
yeah.
Satchmo
Hmm.
Armstrong.
There we go. All
So
right. All
again,
right.
we'd like to give a few shout outs to God, of course, who makes it all possible.
Right.
During this pandemic, we have just drawn so much closer to God.
Oh
So we
yeah.
don't take things for granted at all.
I'm
We're
telling you.
here only by His grace,
That's
His
right.
mercy.
That's right.
So
That's
a
right.
special shout out to BS3 Network. We're now on Roku TV. If you were not aware, you go on Roku and download
Hmm.
that app, and you'll get just a variation of all the shows that are offered on BS3 Network.
Right.
And then
Right.
we'd
Right.
like to give respect and honor to our son,
Oh
Ben
yeah.
Sudderth III, who we also call Mr. Podcaster himself,
Right. The Podfather.
the Podfather. That's right. I call him Boss Man too. But we have podcasters
Hmm.
from so many different
Yeah.
arenas and topics around sports,
Hmm.
music, family, life, spirituality,
Hmm.
marriage,
Right.
politics,
Right.
comedy, society, culture, education, movie and TV reviews,
Hmm.
and of course
Hmm.
relationships.
Hmm.
So again, it's on the screen. If you're interested in getting started in podcasting, he is
Hmm.
available and willing to help you to get started. And if you need to reach out to us, We welcome your comments, your input, any possible topics at Sudds-R-Us@gmail.com. So thank you so much for tuning in. We just want to go ahead and get started. Oh, thank you for tuning in, Jason Fearman.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you so much for tuning in. Mama Joe and Tom, thank you both for tuning in. Hey, y'all. And then, of course, Mr. Podfather himself, Ben Sudderth III. Thank you so much for your support.
All right. Wow. Hope y'all ready. We're getting ready to get down. I'm telling you. I mean, way down. Not just down to the deep south of New Orleans, but I'm talking about down philosophically.
That's
with
right.
African American history and the influence on music in this country. We're gonna start out, like Irene had mentioned, with Charles Joseph Buddy Bolden. Now, he was born in September the 6th, 1877. He was an African American cornetist who was regarded by contemporaries as the key figure in the development of a New Orleans style of ragtime.
Right.
Ragtime music, or jazz. They spelled it J-A-S-S, which later came to be known as jazz, J-A-Z-Z. But ragtime, also spelled rag-time and rag space time. It was a musical style that enjoyed its peak popularity between 1895 and 1919. Its cardinal trait is a syncopatic of offbeat rag rhythm. Ragtime was popularized during the early 20th century by ragtime composer Scott Joplin and his school of classical ragtime, which was survived by James Scott and Joseph Lamb after Joplin's death in 1917. Now, I'm going to get back to Buddy Bolden in a minute, but I just had to share a story with you about this brother, Scott Joplin, born November 24th, 1868. That's about 9 years before Buddy Bolden. He was an African-American composer and pianist. Joplin is also known as the king of ragtime because of the fame achieved for his ragtime composition, music that was born out of the African-American community. Now, during this period, during his career, he wrote over 40 original ragtime pieces, 1 ragtime ballet, and 2 operas. That's right. 1 ragtime ballet and 2 operas. One of the first and most popular pieces was Maple Leaf Rag, became ragtime's first and most influential hit, and has been recognized as the archetypal of rag. Joplin considered ragtime to be a form of classical music and largely disdained the practice of ragtime such as that in honky-tonk. Now, Joplin was the second of 6 children born to Giles Joplin, a former slave from North Carolina, which is our home state. Praise the Lord. That's why I had to tell a little bit about this brother. He's from North Carolina.
Wow.
So his mother was Florence Gibbons. She was a free-born African-American woman from Kentucky. Now, his birth date was accepted by early biographers, Ruddy Blesh and James Haskins, as November 24th, 1868. Although later on, biographer Edwin A. Berlin showed this was almost certainly inaccurate. There is a disagreement over his exact place of birth in Texas, with Blesh identified Texarkana and Berlin showing the earlier records of Joplin being June 1870 census, which located him in Linden at the age of 2. But by 1880, Joplin moved to Texarkana, Arkansas, where Giles, his father, worked as a railroad laborer, and Florence, his mother, as a cleaner. which was a typical job for uneducated Black women back in that day. But as Joplin's father played the violin for plantation parties in North Carolina, and his mother sang and played the banjo. Now, these were parties. These were parties that took place in the big house. So Joplin was given a rudimentary musical education by his family. And from the age of 7, he was allowed to play the piano while his mother cleaned. Now, that was smart of her. In order for her son to be given an opportunity to improve his craft and develop his gift. Don't be mistaken now. He inherited the gift from God through his parents, but having access to practice in the big house.
That's strategic.
Oh, that was a privilege. That was a big deal back then. So at some point in the early 1880s, Giles Joplin left the family for another woman. And Florence struggled to support her children through domestic work only. This is sadly, unfortunately, another typical behavior pattern of Black men in the South that abandon their families for another woman. Biographer Susan Curtis speculates that Florence's support of her son's musical education was a critical factor behind her separation from Giles, who wanted the boy to pursue practical employment that would supplement the family's income. Here's another prime example of a Black mother making the sacrifice to support her son.
Making it happen.
Florence is the real MVP. And like Kevin Durant said about his mother.
That's right.
Joplin moved to Sedalia, Missouri in 1894 and earned a living as a piano teacher at the age of 26.
Wow.
There he taught future ragtime composer Arthur Marshall, Scott Hayden, and Brun Campbell. He began publishing music in 1895. And the publication of his Maple Leaf Rag in 1899 brought him fame. This piece had a profound influence on writers of ragtime. It also brought Joplin a steady income for life. Though he did not reach his level of success again and frequently had financial problems, but in 1901, Joplin moved to St. Louis, where he continued to compose and publish and regularly perform in the community. The score to his first opera was The Guest of Honor. It was confiscated in 1903 with his belongings for a so-called non-payment of bills and is now considered lost, which is sad.
Look at that.
It's just sad, my brothers and sisters, because it's another typical occurrence for a successful, artistic, talented Black man living in a racist society to lose his work. Now, in 1916, Joplin descended to dementia as a result of neurosyphilis. He was admitted to Manhattan State Hospital in January 1917 and died there 3 months later at the age of 48. He was still relatively a young man.
Right.
Joplin's death is widely considered to mark the end of ragtime as a mainstream music format. Over the next several years, it evolved with other styles into stride, jazz, and eventually the big band swing. But the interesting thing, my brothers and sisters, is that down through the years, a lot of Black musical geniuses have died a tragic death. Marvin Gaye was killed by his father because of a drug addiction. Prince died because of a pain-killing or pain meds overdose. And Michael Jackson, the king of pop, died because of anesthesia overdose. And the similarities are with Scott Joplin, who's the king of ragtime, and Buddy Bolden, who's the king of jazz. These occurrences are not coincidental.
That's right.
I come to share with you, but are orchestrated by the racist white establishment to continue to oppress and limit the success of the African-American musician because they are influenced and possessed by the evil one, which is called Satan. Mm-hmm. So they want to keep us down. Always. They will go to any lengths to keep us down, any lengths to squash and eliminate our history. Let's get back to Buddy. Now, when Buddy was born, Bolden's father, Westmore Bolden, was working as a driver for William Walker, a former master of Buddy's grandfather, Christopher Bolden, who died in 1866. His mother, Alice, or Nee Harris, was 18 when she married Westmore on August the 14th, 1873. Westmore Bolden was around 25 at the time, as records show he was 19 in August of 1866. When Buddy was 6, his father died, after which the boy lived with his mother and other family members. In records of that period, the family name is variously spelled Bolden, B-O-L-E-N, Bodine, B-O-L-D-I-N-G, wow. Bolden, B-O-L-D-A-N, and Bolden, B-O-L-D-E-N, thus complicating the research. Now we can basically understand and relate,
yes,
because our name is often misspelled or mispronounced all the time. We'll call Sudderth, S-U-D-D-E-R-E-T-H. We'll call Sudderth, S-U-D-D-R-E-T-H. We'll call Sudderth, S-U-D-D-U-T-H. But the real pronunciation is Sudderth, S-U-D-D-E-R-T-H. Now, the legend is that my great-great-great-great-grandfather changed the spelling and the pronunciation to differentiate from the slave master's name.
Yeah.
So this could be the reason. I don't have any evidence of this, but it could be the reason why Bolden name has different spellings and different pronunciations. But Buddy likely attended Fisk School in New Orleans, though evidence is circumstantial, as early records of this and other local schools are missing that particular record. How convenient again.
Wow.
This is common practice.
Stuff just disappeared
in the 1800s. I'll tell you. Common practice in the 1800s, early 1900s, to mysteriously lose important documents when it pertains to gifted and blessed African-American musicians, with the goal of trying to erase our pertinent history that gives evidence of our successful qualifications and credentials. Listen to John 10:10. John 10:10 from the King James Version says, "The thief cometh not but to steal and to kill and to destroy.
That's right.
I am come," this is Jesus talking now, "that ye may have life and ye may have it more abundantly." Our history is proof, my brothers and sisters, that we are God-chosen children, and the enemy wants to erase or steal the credit for our creativity, our inventions, and our accomplishments. But I tell you, with God's will, the Sudds-R-Us podcast will not allow that to happen. We're going to tell it the way it is. We're not going to be ashamed of the truth.
That's right. And the more they try to erase, the more we just pop up everywhere.
Right. That's right.
So it's not erasable.
That's right. That's right. We're going to tell it.
Not.
We're going to tell it. We're going to tell it all, as they say. Now, Bolden was known as King Bolden, which is jazz royalty term, encompassing the many jazz musicians who have been termed and exceptionally musicianally gifted and informally granted honorific or aristocratic or royal titles as nicknames. Now, the practice of affixing honorific title to a name of jazz musicians goes back, way back to New Orleans at the start of the 20th century, before the genre was commonly known as jazz, just like Joplin was considered the king of ragtime. Bolden's band was at its peak in New Orleans from around 1900 to 1907. He was known for his loud sound and his improvisational skills, his style and impact on younger musicians. Bolden's Trombonist Willie Carnish, among others, recall making phonographic cylinder recordings with Bolden's band, but none are known to survive. In the movie, as Irene alluded to, if you get a chance, you want to watch it. But in the movie, which is a biopic about Bolden with mystical elements titled Bolden, was released in 2019. It was written and directed by Don Purser, and Gary Carr portrayed Bolden. In the movie, his manager kept the recordings or destroyed them intentionally to keep the artist from having ownership and control of his career. The practice continued for decades. With record labels having artists sign contractual agreements, which eliminated them from having rights to their own music, thus keeping them dependent upon the right record labels and the white business owners. That's why they made and continually make drugs and alcohol readily available to keep them high or intoxicated, to keep them confused, delusional, depressed, inebriated, and unable to learn how to control their music careers and their finances. Many early jazz musicians credited Bolden and his bandmates as having originated what came to be known as jazz, though the term was not in common musical use until after Bolden was musically active. At least one writer has labeled Bolden the father of jazz. He is credited with creating looser, more improvisistic versions of ragtime and blues. Bolden Band was said to be the first to have brass instruments play the blues. He was also said to have adapted ideas from gospel music heard in uptown African-American Baptist churches. See, that's why our first part of Black History Month podcast episode was gospel.
It was gospel. That's where it starts.
To feature those who had the biggest influence
That's right.
on the music industry. From gospel first, then came ragtime, blues, jazz, then came R&B and soul, rock and roll, and funk. Instead of imitating other cornetists, Bolden played the music he heard by ear and adapted it to his horn. He remembered the rhythms we saw in the movie as he was laying under his mother's sewing machine. He remembered the rhythms of the sewing machine from going with his mother in the sweatshops when he was a little boy. In doing so, he created an exciting and novel fusion of ragtime, Black sacred music, marching band music, and the rural blues. He rearranged the typical New Orleans dance band of the time of better accommodating the blues. String instruments became rhythm section. The front line instruments were clarinets and trombones and Bolden's cornet, which resembles a trumpet, but it's a little shorter. Bolden was known for his powerful, loud, wide open playing style. Joe King Oliver, Freddie Keppert, and Bunk Johnson and others early New Orleans jazz musicians were directly inspired by his playing. One of the best known Bolden numbers is Funky Butt, later known as Buddy Bolden's Blues, which represents one of the earliest references to the concept of funk in popular music. This is back in the early 1900s. Which would be our fourth and final part of this series, because we're considering ourselves P-Funketeers. But Bolden's Funky Butt was, as Danny Barker once put it, a reference to the old factory effect of an auditorium packed full of sweaty people, dancing close together, belly rubbing, or we like to call it bumping and grinding. But it's also credited with inventions of Big Four, a key rhythmic innovation on the marching band beat, which gave embryonic jazz much more room for individual improvisation. As Winston Marsalis explains, the Big Four was the first syncopatic bass drum pattern to deviate from the standard on the beat march. The second half of the Big Four is the pattern commonly known as the ham bone. Ham bone rhythm, developed from sub-Saharan African music traditions. Let me just say this and I'll close. In many parts of sub-Saharan Africa, the use of music is not just limited to entertainment. It serves a purpose of local community and helps it to conduct daily routines. Traditional African music supplies appropriate music and dance for work and for religious ceremonies of birth, naming, rites of passage, marriage, and funerals. The beats and sounds of the drum are used in communication as well as in cultural expression. This is why the slaves would sing while they were working in the cotton and the tobacco fields. African dances are largely participatory. There are traditionally no barriers between dancers and onlookers except with regard to spiritual, religious, and initiating dances. Even ritual dances often have a time when spectators participate. Dances help people work, mature, praise, or criticize members of the community, celebrate festivals and funerals, compete, recite history, proverbs, and poetry, and encounter God. They inculcate social patterns and values. Many dances are performed by only males or females. Dances often segregate by gender, reinforcing gender roles in children. Community structures such as kingship and age and status are often reinforced. To share rhythm is to form a group of consciousness, to entrain with one another, to be part of collective rhythm of life to which all are invited to contribute. Psalms 149:3 from the King James Version says, "Let them praise his name in the dance. Let them sing praises unto him with the timbrel and harp." This is an African-American tradition which was incorporated from Africa that birthed a rhythmic innovation on the marching band beat, which gave embryonic jazz music style. So dancing is a way of embracing the rhythm and the lyrics of the music. Bolden suffered an episode of acute alcoholic psychosis in 1907 at the age of 30. With full diagnosis of dementia praecox, today called schizophrenia. He was submitted to Louisiana State Insane Asylum at Jackson, a mental institution, where he spent the rest of his life. Recent research has suggested that Bolden may in fact have suffered from pellagra, which is a vitamin deficiency commonly among poor and Black groups in the population, and in 1907 swept through the South because of a lack of quality foods, bad eating habits, and not having access to the right nutrients, which was not necessarily their choice back then. But we have a choice today. If I just hand it over with something serious, we have a choice. And this is to watch our diets, what we intake.
That's right.
Can also affect us mentally as well as medically. His death on November 4th, 1931 was caused by cerebral arterioschlerosis, according to the death certificate. In the movie, it shows his manager providing him with cocaine to keep him hallucinating and depending on him to supply the drugs to support his habit. That put him in a permanent depressive state. Bolden married Hattie Oliver and had a child with her born on the 2nd of May, 1897. They named their son Charles Joseph Bolden Jr. Just to give you a few commemorations on Bolden. He has a statue in Louis Armstrong Park in New Orleans. Duke Ellington paid tribute to Bolden in 1957. A drum is a woman. The trumpet part was taken by Clark Terry. The Bolden band tune Funky Butt, better known as Buddy Bolden Blues, since it was first recorded under the title by Jelly Roll Martin. alternatively titled I Thought I Heard Buddy Bolden Say, has been covered by hundreds of artists, including Dr. John on his album Going Back to New Orleans, Hugh Laurie on his album Let Them Talk. Hey Buddy Bolden is a song on the album of Nina Simone Sings Ellington. Winston Marsalis speaks about Bolden in an introductory and performance of Buddy Bolden on his album Live at the Village Vanguard. The Buddy Prison or Buddy Award is the prime award honoring Norwegian jazz musicians. Wow. Hopalong wrote Buddy in the Parade as a tribute to Bolden. Michelet Thompson recorded Buddy Bolden's Rag in 1995. We salute the king of jazz, the father of jazz, Buddy Bolden.
All right. Yeah, that documentary, y'all, put that on your watch list. Now to get to Satchmo, who was born August 4th, 1901, and he passed away July 6th, 1971. And Satchmo was just one of his nicknames. He was also known as Satch, Louis, and Pops. But his career spanned 5 decades, all within those different variations of jazz that I talked about. But we're going to pay homage to him. His full name is Louis Daniel Armstrong. He was among the most influential figures in jazz. And as I said before, 5 decades. So we're going to talk a little bit about his childhood. Now, he was born in New Orleans. His parents were Mary Albert and William Armstrong. Now, his mother, Mary, gave birth to him in Louisiana at the age of 16. Very common in those days and times. Now, his father, here we go again. Sad, so sad to say, but his father abandoned the family shortly thereafter. And after 2 years, get this. Now, 2 years later, his father hooks up with another lady. And they have a daughter. Her name is Beatrice. They call her Mama Lucy Armstrong. Now, his father, Louis Armstrong's father, William Armstrong, brings Mama Lucy, the daughter, back to live with Louis and his mother. So Mary Albert is, you talking about an MVP. This sister is tough. I mean, it was known back in that day for you to raise like your relative's child. But, you know, this was kind of unique. And what a woman she was. Hats off to her. I guess she said it's not the child's fault. You know, I'm going to raise this child. So Louis Armstrong was then being raised by his grandmother until the age of 5. And then he returned back with his mother, who lived in a very impoverished area of New Orleans, which was called the Battlefield. And now the Battlefield was a tough area. It's called Bacco Town. And they also gave it that name, which included, of course, illicit gambling, prostitution. You know, they said the toughest characters in the land used to live there. And they would shoot and fight, you know, all the time. So at the age of 6, I just heard you say Buddy Bolden attended the Fisk School for Boys. And apparently this school was accepting the Black children in the racially segregated system in New Orleans. So that was a blessing. That was a blessing for him. But at age 7, Louis Armstrong lived with the Konosfi family. It's a Jewish immigrant family. And their home became his second home. I tell you, God puts people in place where you need them, regardless of the race. So this family hired him along with other young black guys or black boys to help them with their budding coal and junk businesses. So they were in the coal business. And so the Konosfi, the mother, she would sing lullabies to Louis Armstrong in Yiddish and in Russian. And literally they treated him like family. So they invested in Louis Armstrong. And so he wrote a memoir. In his memoir, he talked about how this family also experienced extensive discrimination by the other white folks in the area who thought, you know, who they think they are going to take these little boys into their home, you know, and they were struggling as it was. But he says, you know, to be 7 years old, and he could easily see the ungodly treatment that they were receiving as a result of him being there. But he wrote about what he learned from them and how to live, and to live a real life with determination. So this story, as you're going to hear, you will see that he had great determination. So his first musical performance, I thought this was so cute, was on the side of the Carnosvy's junk wagon. And he distinguished them, because they were traders, he distinguished them from all the others by playing a tin horn to attract their customers. And so Morris must have been a son, one of Louis's friends, the Carnosvy family. He advanced him some money to purchase his first cornet from a pawn shop. Like, what a blessing. So Louis Armstrong really honored this family, and he was Baptist, but he could speak fluent Yiddish, and he wore a Star of David until the day he died, in memory of this family that helped raise him pretty much. So when Louis Armstrong was 11, he dropped out of school. His mother moved into a one-room house with him, of course, Lucy, or Mama Lucy, and her common-law husband, which was Tom Lee. And they lived next door to her brother, which his name was Ike, and he had 2 sons. So Louis Armstrong was so musically inclined. I mean, he just didn't care. He joined a quartet. Of boys who sang in the streets for money. Now, we as a people know that's very common. We're going to use our gifts wherever, whenever we can. And back in the day, we didn't call it singing. We didn't even call it singing. We called it crooning. You know, and that's what he did. He was determined to continue his music career. And so he said, and in his youth, every time I close my eyes, blowing that trumpet of mine, I look right into the heart of good old New Orleans. So it was giving me something to live for. Now, that's his words. At the age of 11, he was a little, you know, little mysterious, little curious little boy. He borrowed his stepfather's gun without his permission, of course, and he fired a blank into the air. Now, he didn't hit anybody, but of course, he gets arrested on New Year's Eve in 1912, and he spent the night in a New Orleans juvenile court, and then was sentenced the next day to detention. And so he was in this home that was ran like a military camp, and used corporal punishment. Corporal punishment. And the captain there his name was Joseph Jones. Now, there were no mattresses, and the meals were very little, bread and molasses. I mean, that's all that he got. So you can imagine he was determined. I'm like, I got to get out of here. I'm not going to do that again.
That's right.
So he began to develop his skills by playing in a band while he was in there. Now, this gentleman named Peter Davis, he was a frequent visitor at the home at the request of Captain Joseph Jones. Look at God. I mean, he just lines you up. And so Joseph Jones invited Peter Davis to play. And of course, he became Armstrong's first teacher. And he chose Armstrong as a band leader. So like I said before, the Lord will make a way. He will open doors and put you where you need to be. And not only that, to learn, I'm sure he learned a lesson from that, but to expand and to grow. So in 1914, at the age of 13, Armstrong was released into the custody of his father, interesting, and his new stepmother, Gertrude. I don't know, that name itself was something. But he lived in their household with the 2 stepbrothers that were born, at some point in time, for several months. But then Gertrude got pregnant, had a daughter. They put Louis out. So Louis had to go back home to his mother and to Mama Lucy. And get this, he had to sleep in the bed with the Mama Lucy and his mother, Mary Albert. They still lived in the battlefield, and all he could think of was, going back to those old temptations, his old ways. And I'm sure, he kept seeking out ways that he could utilize his talent. Yes, so he found a job at a dance hall owned by Harry Ponce, who had connections to organized crime. Oh, my Lord. I guess that may have been common in New Orleans. Right. But he met this 6-foot tall drummer. His name was Black Benny, who became his guide and his bodyguard. I mean, sometimes you're in rough company, but there's somebody that's going to look out for you. Right. So with this band, the 13-year-old Armstrong attracted the attention of Kid Ory, who was a composer, a trombonist, as well as a band leader. There's another hookup. So around the age of 15, he pimped for a prostitute named Nutsie. Lord, these names. And what do you think about pimping at 15? But anyway, but that relationship failed after she stabbed Armstrong in the shoulder. And his mother, here come Mama, Mary Albert, choked this woman half to death. She should have went on and took her out. But anyway, I know how it is with being a mother. You can mess with me, but my children are off limits. Off limits. So he tried to straighten up and get his life right. So he went to school studying shipping management. But of course, at the time, he just didn't have the money for the fees. So Louis, he never gave up. He may have felt defeated, but he did not throw in the towel. That's something for somebody to hear today. Don't throw in the towel. So while selling coal, he heard spasm bands. Now I had to look that up. That's bands where people played household objects, whatever that was. That's what they used to make some sound with. So he heard the early sounds of jazz from bands that played in brothels and dance halls where King Oliver performed. Now, then King Oliver is the one that taught Louis Armstrong and became his mentor. And actually, King Oliver actually played with Duke Ellington. So even at an early age, Louis Armstrong had riverboat education experience. He played in brass bands on riverboats in New Orleans. First on an excursion boat in September of 1918. He toured with a band which toured on a steamboat named Sydney with an entertainment line up and down the Mississippi River. What a privilege that was. So they were so proud of Louis' musical knowledge, and that he insisted that Louis Armstrong and other musicians learn sight reading, learn how to read music. Now that's a blessing. He learned how to read music. So he described this experience, being on that riverboat, as going to the university, since it was giving him a wider experience, a wider vision of working with written arrangements. So he returned to New Orleans periodically, but in 1919, Oliver decided to go north and resigned his position as Kid Ory's band leader. So here we go. Armstrong replaced him. And he also became second trumpet in the Tuxedo Brass Band. So throughout his riverboat experience, his musicianship began to mature and expand. And at 20 years old, he could read music. He became one of the first jazz musicians to be featured on an extended trumpet solo, injecting his own personality and style. And we know he had a style all of his own. And he started singing in his performance as well. So during the 1920s, Louis Armstrong brought a huge impact during the Harlem Renaissance era. And the poet Langston Hughes. He admired Louis so much and acknowledged him as one of the most recognized musicians during that era, and penned him as the world's greatest trumpet or trumpeter. And so in 22, he moved to Chicago at the invitation of his mentor, who was Joe King Oliver, to play in a Creole jazz band. Never seemed to ever had to look for a job. His talent just spoke for him. So he went to New York after that in 1929. He moved to Los Angeles in 1930, returned to Chicago in 1931. I mean, he just moved and traveled. But Armstrong had this rich, raspy voice that was such an influential singer and skillful improviser.
Right.
You know, in this day and time, we call it ad lib. You know, you just make it up as you go, basically.
Right.
And he was also skilled at scat singing, or call it scatting. But some musicians say that their creativity was brought out when they smoked a little weed,
right,
or unfortunately when they indulged in some narcotics and some alcohol. But Louis Armstrong was known to be a heavy marijuana smoker for much of his life. Maybe that's where the raspiness come from. I don't know. But he spent 9 days in jail as a result of that in 1930 and being in possession of drugs outside of a club. And he describes marijuana as 1,000 times better than whiskey. In 1931, he appeared in his first movie, which was X-Flame, and was also convicted of marijuana possession during that time, but received a suspended sentence.
Wow.
So he must love Chicago, because he returned back to Chicago in late 31 and played in bands. But when the mob insisted that he get out of town, Armstrong visited New Orleans and had a hero's welcome. Wow, that's better than Jesus coming back, and then wasn't he welcome in his own town? But he saw old friends. Now, this mob thing really blew me away. I'm like, what kind of mob was this? But just listen up. There's going to be another instance of it. Now, he sponsored a local baseball team while he was back home in New Orleans, named the Armstrong Secret Nine. And he had a cigar named after him. But as soon as he was on the road again, after a tour across the country, shadowed by the mob, he fled to Europe. I mean, these people were really after him.
Yeah.
I mean, you could just about imagine who they were. I know my husband think they were the KKK. I don't know. Obviously, people that did not like him, did not want to hear his music, did not want him, expanding and growing and becoming, well known. So after returning to the United States, he undertook several exhausting tours, and his agent, here we go, had an erratic behavior, couldn't keep up with his own money, but trying to, manage Louis Armstrong's money. And so he pretty much bankrupt Louis. He was short of cash, breach of contract violations. And so very typical of that day.
There we go again.
Very typical. But nowadays you can't blame the artists that are not only gifted, but they keep improving their craft. But at that time they were just not smart, or business smart with the finances. But today's artists are totally different. They're not playing. They're independent. They have their own record label, business savvy, and smart. So they're not going to be taken advantage of. So later on down the line, he hired a new manager. Another tough mob connected wheeler dealer, they called him, who began to straighten out his legal mess, his mob troubles, and his debts. So maybe that's an indication. Maybe he had, just got too deep with the mob. So Armstrong was also began to experience problems with his fingers and his lips. Can you imagine the repetitiveness of doing that all the time, and the way he blew that horn? And it aggravated that unorthodox playing style that he had. So as a result, he branched out and developed his vocal styles, and making him his first theatrical performance. And he appeared in movies including Cosby's 1938 hit Pennies from Heaven. I kind of remember that. It was in 1936, but they probably played it a lot. But in 1937, Armstrong substituted for a gentleman on CBS radio. And so he became the first African-American to host a sponsored national broadcast. So I did not know that. That is phenomenal. So Armstrong continued his legacy and continued to focus on his own vocal career. So the popularity he gained brought together many Blacks and white audiences to watch him perform. And so after spending many years on the road, Armstrong settled permanently in Queens, New York in 1943. So his manager decided to dissolve the Armstrong Big Band in 1947, but he established a 6-piece traditional jazz group featuring Armstrong. So he was true and committed to him. Not only did he travel the world, but he was an actor starring in musical romantic comedy films such as High Society in 1956 and Hello, Dolly in 1969. Y'all remember that? Hello, Dolly. I love him singing that. But that I just tried to do that, y'all. But in 1950, he toured in Brazil. 1960, he toured in Ghana and Nigeria. This man traveled. After finishing his contract with Decca Records, he became a freelance artist.
All right.
Now he's getting some little knowledge, some wisdom, and then he recorded for other labels. So he continued an intense international touring schedule. But in the great year of 1959, I'm sorry to say, he suffered a heart attack in Italy and had to rest. So Armstrong kept touring well into the 1960s, though. He didn't rest very long, even visiting the communist bloc in 1965. But in 1968, he was approaching 70 and his health began to give out. So he suffered heart and kidney ailments that forced him to stop touring. Now, he did not perform publicly at all in 1969 and spent most of the year recuperating at home. Meanwhile, his longtime manager passed away. And by the summer of 1970, his doctors pronounced him fit enough to resume performances. Now, this man was 70 years old. He embarked on another world tour, but a heart attack forced him to take a break for 2 months. I mean, that's only 2 months. So Armstrong made his last recorded trumpet performance on his 1968 album, Disney Songs by Satchmo Way. I got to go back and listen to that. So his married life, he was into women. He loved his women. On March 19th, 1999, he married Daisy Parker. And they adopted a 3-year-old boy. His name was Clarence, whose mother was Armstrong's cousin. Now, the internet says this was his son. Apparently, this was his cousin's son, who died after giving birth. And Clarence, unfortunately, was mentally disabled. He had a head injury at an early age. And so he committed, Louis Armstrong committed the rest of his life taking care of his cousin's son, even beyond the divorce of Daisy Parker. And in 1924, he married Leo Hardin Armstrong. Now, this was King Oliver's pianist. Now, she had divorced her first husband a few years earlier, and she's the one that really helped Louis Armstrong get his develop his career and get him going. But they separated in 1931 and divorced in 1938. So he moves on and marries Alpha Smith. And this relationship, she was playing at a venue in 1920, and they continued a long relationship after that. 4 years later, they divorced in 1942. And so his final wife was Lucille Wilson. She was a singer at the Cotton Club in New York, and they remained married, thank goodness, until he died in 1971. So Armstrong's marriages, all of that, they never had any children together. And so in 2012, there was a young lady who was 57 years old that shows up and said, Louis Armstrong is my daddy. And so apparently her mother was a dancer at the Cotton Club as well. And in 1955, the manager then told Louis Armstrong, about her accusation, and Louis believed her. And so he ordered that this manager pay her monthly allowances of like $4,830. That's $400 pretty much a month or something like that. That may have not been a lot, but he owned up to it, and he took care of his responsibility. But the trumpet is a notoriously hard instrument, which began to develop some lip issues for Louis Armstrong, and he suffered lip damage over much of his life due to his aggressive style. If you blow that horn that hard, that your jaws blow up like that, that impacted his lips tremendously. So much so it dug into the inner flesh and into his inner lip. So as he was touring, he had this ulceration so severe that he had to stop playing for a whole year. Wow. He tried using salves. You know how back in the day you got the home remedies. Right, you're gonna start using salves and creams and he literally tried to cut the scar off with a razor blade. I'm surprised he didn't get infection. But he was actual spokesperson for the NSAIDs, is what it's called, cream lip salve. He became their spokesperson. He used it that much. Right. But during a backstage performance, one of his friends, see, you need friends that's going to speak truth and speak life. Right. He told him, man, you need to go to the doctor and get that treated. You can't keep relying on these home remedies. Right. It's not working. So he decided he wasn't going to do it. Until the final years of his life, you know, his health started failing. And the doctor said surgery would be considered too risky. Right. So in 1959, he was hospitalized with pneumonia while on tour in Italy. And the doctors were concerned about his lips, his lungs, and his heart. But by June 26, he recovered. He received many accolades in his day, 3 Grammy Award nominations, and then he won a Grammy for his vocal performance of Hello, Dolly in 1964. Oh, wow. In 2017, after his death, he was inducted in the Rhythm and Blues Hall of Fame. So again, salute to Louis Armstrong for his tenacity, his determination, his consistency, and his contribution, and as well as his musical talent. There's none other like him. Louis Daniel Satchmo Armstrong. All right. So we thank you guys for tuning in. We've had some new visitors join us. Thank you, classmate Robert Davis. Good afternoon. And cousin Valeria Lutz. Thank you so much. Good afternoon to you as well.
Thank you for tuning in.
Thank you. That's history, y'all. We're gonna post some further information on Facebook about these 2 legendary giants in history. As always, we hope that you have a great weekend or the rest of your weekend. Continue to celebrate Black history. They give us the shortest month of the year, but we celebrate 365.
That's right.
They need to know. If they don't know, they need to know. So post, publicize, share. There's so much more that we need to know and to share with our young people about this rich Black history. And literally, if you think about it, if they keep killing us off as they think they're doing, where are they gonna get their ideas from?
Right.
Because we're the innovators, we're the trendsetters, and we make things happen. So again, Louis Armstrong, he grew up as a Baptist, and I know he lived with the Jewish family, but he grew up as a Baptist, and he not only beat the odds, but I say he surpassed them. And I'm sure he believed in God, who blessed him, who protected him, healed him, provided for him, protected him, and guided him all those many years of his performing life. And this scripture came to mind as I was studying about his life. And it's in Philippians 4:13, where it says, "For I can do everything through Christ who gives me strength." And I truly believe that was like his testament. And truly his biography, his life story really speaks to that. So we hope that you enjoyed the show. We missed last week, so we got one more week to go with another episode of the impact of music on our lives. So thank you again for joining us, and we'll see you next week.
Thank you for tuning in.
Thank you.